Welcome to the Birth Abroad podcast. My name is Megan Jennings, and I'm honored to host mothers who have come here to share their overseas childbirth stories. From fertility journeys to postpartum and beyond, this podcast is meant to hold space for women all over the world to share their unique experiences with the challenge of becoming a mother away from one's home country. Let's get in today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today I'm going to be bringing you actually part one of a two-part episode. I interviewed Jovana Paredes, she goes by the name Jovie, and it just got to be a little bit long, so I split it up between both of her birth stories. So this is going to be her first birth story, and then the second part, of course, is her second birth story. But both episodes speak to different aspects of birth culture in the Netherlands, so it's really interesting to hear. So without giving any more else away, here is part one of Jovie's story. Hey Jovie, and welcome to the Birth Abroad podcast. Thank you so much for taking some time to sit down and share your story with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So to begin with, can you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself, like where you're from, where you currently live, who's in your family, maybe what you do for a living?
Sure. So I call myself an American because that's the passport that I carry, but I was actually born in Serbia. When I was 5, we moved to Canada, where I lived for 10 years. And then when I was 15, we moved to America, where I became a citizen, and, that is now I am an American, living in the Netherlands. So I'm kind of like a global citizen, I would consider myself. I came to the Netherlands to work in the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia when I was a law student. And that is where I actually met my husband, who was also a Spanish lawyer who was here in the Netherlands doing the same kind of thing. We met in January. We were married by July of that year. And that was 11 and a half years ago. So, yeah.
I have a lot of jealousy about your life right now. It sounds like you've been everywhere, and what a career.
Yeah, well, that career part, to be an international criminal lawyer is really interesting, but it's also really, really challenging, not only from the emotional aspects of, you're dealing with war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and these are like crimes with thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of victims. And, to be living that every day, to be reading testimony about that every day, to hear witnesses and things, like it's really an emotional thing. So I lasted about 3 years in that career.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I was just like, this is enough, especially being married to someone who does the same thing. That was all we did. That was all we talked about. And so I said, I need a boring job, like a job that I can go and work like from 9 to 5 and come home and not think about it anymore. So then I went into contract law, and it was great. Okay. And then after I had my kids, I actually just decided to give up my career and become a stay-at-home mom. One of the challenges that we face as expats, and I'm sure so many of your listeners will be able to relate, is when you don't have any extended family around. So like my husband is not Dutch. We have 0 grandparents, 0 cousins, aunts, uncles, or anything around. So it's just the 2 of us and our 2 kids, which means that anytime anything happens, it's up to one of us to figure it out, go pick up your kid from daycare, do whatever needs to be done. And I just felt like with both of us having full-time jobs, I didn't feel like I could do my job well because I was constantly thinking about my kids and am I going to be there to pick them up on time or, everything. And at the same time, I didn't feel like I was giving as a mom because I was working such long hours. So that's how we decided to I stopped working and started a YouTube channel, also helping like people moving to the Netherlands, just making kind of informational videos about the Netherlands or just fun content. Sky's the limit on my channel. So,
and I know for a fact that those videos are so helpful because I've sought them out for people, expats that have moved to Sweden, because there's so much that even if you do have like a spouse that is from the country you're living in, it's hard for them to even, teach you how to get completely up to speed in a foreign country. It's like getting a driver's license and things like that. It's just something that's not something that even they think about often. So,
Totally.
YouTube is such a powerful engine.
I agree. And then at the same time, if you do have your spouse who's from that country, like just having to rely on them for every single detail, can be like, it can change the dynamics of a relationship, you know?
Yep,
Um,
absolutely.
so it's really good to be able to kind of just be like, I'm going to learn about how to get a driving license on my own, you know, not to just have to be dependent on them for everything. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, I understand you on that.
Yeah.
So anyway, so let's take it back just a few steps and
Yes.
talk about your process of deciding to start a family and maybe any research you might have done about the whole maternity process, pregnancy, etc., before you guys even started to have kids.
Well, okay, so Alex is my husband. We decided to start a family after we had already been living in the Netherlands for about 5 years. And we decided just to obviously start trying and see what happens. So I just downloaded one of those like fertility tracker apps, you know, that tracks your
Mm.
period. And we started trying. Well, like 8 cycles went by and there was nothing. We were not successful. So then we decided to see if we could visit like a fertility doctor just to make sure things were okay. And then we went in for an intake with the fertility doctor, and they just said, okay, you know, in next month when you get your period, come in for a blood test. Like we're going to start doing blood work at this point. And lo and behold, there was no more period after that because I got pregnant. So we just started the process, and then it was, yeah, like a spontaneous pregnancy, and it was very exciting. And yeah, so here we go. So we were really excited to be having a baby. Um, and after that initial excitement passed, that's when the fear set in for me. It was like, oh, am I qualified? I didn't go to postgraduate school for moms. Like, I don't know what to expect here. Like, how do I do this? Can I do this? You know? But yeah, that was kind of like my initial, like, oh, okay, we're pregnant. This is real, you know?
Mm-mm. Yeah, it's a shocking feeling sometimes, especially when you're so focused on getting to that point of it happening. Sometimes you don't even look beyond it, and then it's sort of like, oh God, what do I do now?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That was exactly it. That was,
So what did you do? What is the process? Did you just call up local midwives, or like what is the process for starting the pregnancy monitoring in the Netherlands?
well, here's the thing. So, yes, in the Netherlands, the process is that you would go to your house doctor or your, yeah, general practitioner, and then they would confirm your pregnancy, and then you just go to the midwives. But I did not have any faith in a midwife. I was like, what is a midwife? I've never heard of a, not never heard of a midwife, but I was like, in the United States, we don't see midwives, we see doctors. And so I insisted on seeing a gynecologist. I mean, like I fought for it because I was like, no, I don't want a midwife. I had never even gone to a midwife. I had never even interviewed one, never met one, but I was just like, no way, I don't want this. And spoiler alert, like that was a very, very, very dumb idea for me because midwives are the way to go. But it took me a while to learn that. So the gynecologist agreed that we could go to them, and we started going there. And every single appointment was met with, "Why are you here?" And I'm like, "Well, for you to check the baby." And they're like, "No, no, no. Why are you here? You are a healthy woman having a normal pregnancy. Why are you wasting taxpayer money on visiting me when you should be at a midwife?" It just wasn't going well, and I was very unhappy, and feeling like very afraid. And any question that we had about like process, like after the baby was born, would kind of be like, well, we don't really care about the baby after it's born. We're only gynecologists. We just care about your pregnancy now. So when I would ask about how do vaccines work in the Netherlands, or do I need to find a pediatrician or whatever, like I would ask those questions, the answers would be like, I don't, that's not my business. Like, that's not my concern. I'm just here to look after your pregnancy. And so that was kind of the approach that the doctors had, which made me feel terrible. And my husband too. We were like, oh my God, this how it's going to be? Like, they really were like, hardcore. So it was just really like a very cold approach, and I did not like it.
Is that sort of how maybe the culture in general is? I actually don't know anything about the Netherlands or Dutch culture. Is that sort of typical of cultures to be a little short, or Or was it just that they didn't really know what to do with the situation at hand?
Well, I think it's just that Dutch people are known for being very direct. They don't beat around the bush for anything. So they thought that I was ridiculous for coming, and they just let me know that, and that's actually something that I really value about Dutch people now that I've kind of understood it. Like they were not saying that to be mean, but I mean, imagine in America going to a doctor and the doctor like being like, "Why are you here?"
Right.
It's just not done, right? So for me, it was a bit of a culture shock, a bit of a just a different approach that in my pregnant state I was like extra sensitive.
Did you ever run into any kind of language barrier, or are you, I'm assuming you're fluent in Dutch now, but were you back then?
No, and I actually still don't speak Dutch, which is embarrassing to admit, but Dutch people are incredible. I have never been to or visited another country where English is not the official language, and yet everybody speaks English to a really high degree here. I've
Okay.
used English in the Netherlands for 11 years. I will learn Dutch. It's on my list. As soon as my youngest goes to school and I have a bit of time and some space in my, I'm not taking care of a baby all the time.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I will learn Dutch. But no, the doctors, I mean, it was easy to communicate in English. So that
Okay.
was a really good thing for us. But yeah, I kind of did that until we went to a birthing course when I was about 6 months pregnant, and we took a birthing class that was led by a doula, and she just opened my eyes to a whole nother world. And at that point, we tried to switch from doctors to midwives. I don't remember the weeks exactly, but let me tell you, it was like this. I gave birth in November and I switched in September, so about
Okay.
7 months pregnant. But basically, what happened was that in July, we flew from the Netherlands to Arizona, where my family lived, to have like a baby shower. And while we were there, my dad, who I mentioned is a doctor, he gave me a blood test because that wasn't something that I had done yet in my pregnancy. They didn't do any urine tests, any blood tests. They didn't do anything. So my dad was like, let's just run some tests on you while you're here. And I was like, great. And so all my tests came back great, no problems. And then he gave me a copy of them to take back with me when I traveled to the Netherlands. When I came back to the Netherlands and I visited my doctor, I gave them the tests, and then they were like, oh, you had some tests done. Well, I guess we'll run some tests too. And I was like, well, I've already had them. And they were like, we'll just do it again. And when they ran the tests the second time, they discovered that I had pregnancy diabetes. So that did not show up on the blood test that my dad had given me. But then when the doctors here, they made me drink that horrible stuff. So that test came positive. At that point, the doctors were like, oh, now you have a medical indication to be with the doctors. And then the entire attitude of them changed because they were like, oh, now you're seeing the doctor because we're monitoring your diabetes. Yeah, so then it was like a whole shift in their attitude. And it just happened to coincide with the moment that my husband and I signed up for this birthing class. And I don't know, I think that up until the moment that I took the birthing class, I was just terrified of giving birth. And I was terrified of pregnancy. I looked at it as a medical condition. I looked at it as something really, truly terrifying because I was like, the whole time I was saying, I want a medical birth. I want to feel no pain, like I don't want to have any kind of anything with birth. I want the baby, the birth itself, like I don't want that. And then I went to this birthing class and learned about the power of women's bodies. And I learned about the actual beauty of giving birth. I just learned that our bodies, like women's bodies, are made for this. And they, like, I don't know, just we're so strong and so powerful. And when we feel pain during childbirth, our brains make hormones that help us counteract that pain. And just, my eyes were opened by a doula that was speaking about birth in such a positive way. And she was saying, yes, okay, of course it's painful. Like we all know it's not easy to birth a human baby. Like it's painful. But if you think about it in a different way, like think instead of thinking how painful the contractions are, think this contraction brings me one step closer to meeting my baby. And this one contraction that has been so painful, I will never feel that one again, right? Like I will feel another one, but that one was gone and that's it. So
Yep.
with that, I just felt so empowered. Oh, and then I learned about water birth and being able to maybe give birth in a bathtub and like how that must be nice and how water is an effective pain reliever. And I learned about the TENS machine, which I think you spoke about as well, like
Yep.
giving you
Yep.
relief. Yeah, so like I learned about all these things that didn't sound so scary. And at that point, my husband and I were like, let's go with a midwife and a doula and let's try to have a totally natural water birth. Like just like my brain just totally went off of the I want a medical full intervention birth to
Mm.
I want it as natural as possible. So then we had to convince the midwives now to take us at this late stage in pregnancy. And also because I have diabetes, which in the Netherlands is a reason to go see a doctor. And here I am coming from a doctor that I insisted on seeing and being like, please, 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 midwives, I was wrong. I really had to, grovel a bit and to kind of beg them to take us, even though we had
Really?
this like diabetes. Yeah, yeah. But I was committed. At this point, I was just like, no, I want to feel what my body can do. Like, I don't think that I will ever feel as strong or as powerful as I will having my children. That is something that we will never feel. Like, it's incomparable to anything else that we will do in our lives. So then I wanted that experience, and the midwives agreed. And they were like, yeah, let's do it. Okay, fine. But we want you to give birth in the hospital. So one thing about the Netherlands is that here you are able to, and a lot of women choose for home birth with a midwife. I don't know if it's like the country with the highest rate of home births, but it's up there. It is completely normal. If you hear about other women like sharing their real stories about their real births and not just like those terrifying things you see on TV and in movies, how much different it really is, you know?
Exactly. And also culturally, because, you and I both are American, or, you identify as American. And back in the States, I feel like pregnancy is considered a medical condition and everyone goes to see an OBGYN. And, it's things like home birth and midwifery and stuff like that is sort of like trained in our brain to be like, oh, that's hippy dippy, it's not safe,
Hmm.
and you have these built-in filters and thoughts and feelings about something that actually is, very normal elsewhere in the world and totally
Yeah,
safe.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, when you think about midwives who are complete specialists in birth, even OBGYNs aren't. They're doing other, female related like
Medical practices.
yeah, medical practices,
Yeah.
so they're doing a whole bunch of other stuff and midwives are just dealing with birth. So they are actually the real experts. But
Exactly.
yeah, I was just dumb and I didn't want to see it. And now I will shout it from the rooftops that I made a mistake and that I was wrong in my approach.
Mm.
So yeah, so then we were accepted with these midwives who then said, that's fine, we will help you, but you still have to give birth in the hospital. A home birth for you is off the table because of your pregnancy diabetes, and if there's a complication, we just want you to be in the hospital, which
Right.
I felt was like a fair compromise. So yeah, so there we go. I was working all throughout my pregnancy until 4 weeks before the due date, and that's in the Netherlands. It's you have to stop working 4 weeks before your due date. Depending, you can choose between 6 weeks, 5 weeks, and 4 weeks before, but 4 weeks is the latest that you can stop working.
Okay.
So I stopped working 4 weeks before my due date, and it was great. Basically, in the Netherlands, you get 4 months paid. They call that pregnancy and maternity leave. So the 4 weeks before is your pregnancy leave, and then you get 3 months afterwards for
Okay.
maternity leave. That's kind of how it works. So yeah, I went on my pregnancy leave and I really enjoyed that. Also, like you, I was cooking up a storm, like freezer meals, doing all that stuff, and it was lovely. During that time, as I mentioned, we had met like our birth coach. No, not our birth coach. Our birth class teacher. She's a doula as well. And we had asked her if she would be our doula for the birth.
Is doula culture like a big thing out in the Netherlands? Is that like a normal part of, you know, I guess like the birthing process out there?
No. So it's not covered by insurance here. So it is like something that you pay for privately if you want it. But there are several practicing doulas, and in a lot of like the Facebook groups that I'm part of, like about moms in the Netherlands and things, there's a lot of interest around it. So if you want to have one, they are plentiful and they're incredible, but it's not something like a midwife that your insurance would cover.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of like a little, well, it's a luxury if you want to have that, right?
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so we ended up asking, Nicola is her name, so we asked Nicola if she would be our doula, and she agreed. And from that point, she would go with me to midwife appointments, not just with me, but with my husband too. We were all going together. She was very supportive. It was incredible to have another woman that was so close that I could share with her, but at the same time, not someone like my mom. Because if there's like, I don't know if you have the same relationship with your mom or your sisters or, anyone, any female in your family, but if something were to go wrong, like my mom would panic, she
Mm.
would get really afraid. And in that moment, I'm pregnant and I'm afraid. So I needed someone to support me in a way that is not, oh my gosh, panicking as well and
Mm.
increasing my anxiety. So a doula is amazing for that, right? Like you have this expert, also like another birth coach. She knows so much, she's been through so much, and she's able to support you in a very calm way. That was amazing. And also with like a midwife might have 2 or 3 clients giving birth at the same time. And so she'll be in your room and, check you and be with you when you need it, and then she'll leave. Whereas a doula is really with you from the moment that you go into labor until you deliver your baby. They're with
That's a
you.
very good point. Yep.
So, and yeah, while, a midwife can support you with breathing exercises or whatever, like a doula, or at least our doula, ended up, breathing with me through every contraction. I also had back labor, and she was giving me counter pressure with every
Mm.
single contraction, like I was getting a massage, and it was just incredible to have her there. I don't, she was a team with my midwife, and I really felt supported between the two of them and my husband. It was a really supported atmosphere.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, it was great.
So, with your gestational diabetes, did they do extra monitoring toward the end of your pregnancy? Did they make a big deal about like the size of the baby? I know they do that a lot in the States, and it can instill quite a bit of fear in women thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to have this huge baby." What was it like going through that in the Netherlands?
Yeah, so as soon as they discovered that I had the gestational diabetes, they set me up with a dietitian so that we could make a plan on what to eat and how to eat. And what she what she said about my diet was that I was doing a great job with the types of food that I was eating, but I was eating 3 times a day, and that was the mistake that I was making. So what I had to do was exactly the same food that I was eating, just split it up into 6 times a day. Immediately, I received a blood sugar monitor and test strips. Everything was for free, covered by insurance. And I just had to start testing and kind of keeping a food journal and seeing if I could, by splitting up my meals into 6 meals a day, if I could bring my levels down so that I wouldn't have to have insulin. And that was fine. That's what happened. And I don't know, I guess in some way it also gave me kind of a little bit of a degree of control over what was happening, because I could see 6 times a day what my blood sugar was. And I knew, the decisions that I was making on how I would eat. And I knew like if I had 2 extra bites of rice, that would spike my sugar. And so then I shouldn't do that. And it was very reassuring. But yeah, they did say something once or twice about the size of the baby, but it was more about the numbers. It was more like bring your little food journal and your numbers to every single appointment. And we'll go through it, make sure everything's fine. And as long as that was fine, then they were like fine with the baby.
Okay.
It was pretty empowering also to be like, yeah, I can do this.
Well, especially if you like numbers, and you like tests and data. I do. So to be
Yeah.
able to see those things and have a better understanding of what's going on with your body on that level, it actually can be, comforting in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it definitely can be. Yeah. I mean, if you're dealing with that already, like, I remember getting the diagnosis over the phone of having pregnancy diabetes, and I like literally bawled. I mean, I was crying so much. I felt like, what have I done? Like, how did I get to this point? And I got the call at work, and all the conference rooms had just like glass walls so everybody
Oh
could see
no.
you. So I took the call in a conference room, and then I was just crying, and everyone was walking by looking at this like
Oh no.
crazy pregnant lady crying, and they're like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "It's fine." You know, I never wanted walls more. So yeah, but it ended up being okay. I felt like it was okay, and it was monitored, and I was very fortunate not to have any complications with that.
Okay. So, do you want to walk us into the day you went into labor?
Sure. One thing that happened is that I gained 25 kilos in my pregnancy. And I was like, why? How am I gaining all this weight? I had never been more vigilant about my food. I had never been more careful about what I was eating, or like making sure that everything was the healthiest possible thing, and that, I was not sitting there eating pints of ice cream, but I was just gaining all this weight, and I didn't understand why or how, and no one could explain it.
Oh,
Um, by the end of my pregnancy, my shoes didn't fit. Like, my shoes. I had to get shoes in 2 sizes bigger because my feet were so fat. They were so swollen. So I couldn't wear my jewelry. Already at 6 weeks pregnant, I was in maternity clothes, first baby. So you can imagine, I just like
aha.
swelled up like a balloon. They didn't say it was related to my pregnancy. Well, to my diabetes. I don't know why that happened, but that happened. And I'll tell you why that's important later. But
Okay.
that did happen, that I was just like huge. I was huge. It was horrible. So, okay. Yeah, we went in for a midwife appointment like when I was 40 weeks pregnant. It was on a Friday, and I was like, okay, well, I mean, he's due. It was 1 or 2 days past his due date, and I was just like ready to to have that baby. I'm
Right.
sure you can also relate. At that point,
Yes.
you're ready.
Yes.
And so I asked the midwife, I'm like, so is something happening down there? And she was like, no, nothing is happening at all. And then she offered to do like that membrane sweep,
Mm.
which is awful. I don't know why that is ever a good idea, but yeah, that was probably the worst part of it all. And then, yeah, so we agreed to have that done. She did that on Friday morning. And then on Friday night, my husband and I were just like laying, relaxing, watching a movie, and I started having contractions, and I was like, "Oh, here we go. It's happening." We started timing them, and they were just kind of like a little bit painful, but they were kind of regular, and I was like, "No, no. I'm having a baby." She did the sweep. Now it's time. Like, everything is the way that it should be, and I was completely convinced that it was time. Uh, and of course, it wasn't. Those were the Braxton Hicks, which I hadn't felt up until that point. So we ended up driving into the hospital that Friday night. The midwife met us. She checked me, and she was like, "No, those were false contractions. You're not having the baby now." So we were like, "Great, okay." We went home. That weekend was like, we went and had like a couples massage. We ate, and we had a date like at a restaurant. We had like spicy food. I did all the things that you're supposed to do to try to have a baby, and none of it was working. And yeah, I mean, I was kind of like, I was antsy at this point. I just wanted to have the baby, and I was ready. And so I was calling my doula, and she said, "What helps get the baby in helps get the baby out." so,
Yep.
so I was like, okay, we're going to have sex, and we're going to do it. We're going to try it, because at this point I'm ready.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we did, which was just like a very uncomfortable situation at that point, but I didn't care because I was like, we're gonna get the baby out. And yeah, I was expecting it to be instant, but again, it wasn't. So that was like, let's say 9 or 10 o'clock at night on Sunday. And I wake up around 3 a.m. So now it's Monday morning and I'm having contractions. And now I'm like, oh, yeah, this is a contraction. This is what it feels like, right? Like now I know what happened on Friday was not real. But it was 3 a.m. and I looked over at my husband and I thought, I'm not going to wake him up now. If, you're supposed to time your contractions, and until they're 5 minutes apart and lasting for a minute, they don't really want you to go in or to call them. So I was like, I'm just going to go downstairs, chill on the sofa, like let my husband sleep, because since we're having the baby today, I want him to be rested. He's going to be there. It's going to be a big day for both of us. So, yeah, so I let him sleep. I called my mom, just like you. I remember in your podcast, you were saying you called your mom and you were
Yep.
talking. I was like, yep, same. So we were just on the phone for a couple of hours and my mom was there. And then when my husband woke up, I was like, hey, so I've been in labor for like a few hours. It's okay. I feel good. But yeah, we should, go see the midwives. And he was like, yeah, I agree. No problem. It just happened that Monday we had a follow-up appointment already scheduled to see the midwives from that appointment on Friday when they had done the sweep. So it didn't occur to me to call them in advance and tell them that I was actually in labor, because I thought, well, we're going to go in at 10 a.m. We're already in the hospital. Their location was in the hospital. So I figured we're going to go in, they'll see me in the clinic, and then they'll just transfer me to my hospital bed. So that was kind of how it worked in my brain, which is not correct. um, so we went in and yeah, the midwives checked me and they were like, oh yeah, okay, you're 4 centimeters dilated. That's great. You're definitely in labor. It's starting. But we are the midwives that are in clinic today. The midwife that is on call, like the one that's supposed to deliver your baby, we need to call her now so she can meet you at the hospital. And I was like, oh, so yeah, my thinking was wrong, thinking, well, they're in the hospital. They'll just go with me.
Right.
That's not how it worked. So they called up the midwife and she was on her way. And in the meantime, they told me that I could go to there's like a birth hotel. I think you were also saying in Sweden you have something like a birth hotel.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, so in this hospital, on the top floor of the hospital was a birth hotel. So they told me, why don't you go up there and just wait for the midwife? And I was like, okay. So my husband and I went up there. They were very kind and they gave us like a room to use. And I just labored in there for, I don't know, an hour or so. And also our doula met us there. So our doula and the midwife came and met us there. I was so excited to see the midwife. And my doula. I was super excited to see them both. And that's when the midwife came in and was like, so this is great. You're having the baby today, but unfortunately, there's no space in this hospital. So we're going to have to go ahead and switch hospitals. And I was
boy.
like, hello? How is that possible? I'm here. I'm in active labor. Like, I'm in labor. Like, it's happening. You can't kick me out. Like, what's going on? But no, that was the thing. They had all these scheduled C-sections and all the beds were taken up in the maternity ward. So they asked us, which hospital do you want to go to out of these two that do have space? And so then we ended up choosing a hospital that we had never been to. And yeah, it was like, so I said to them, okay, fine. Is an ambulance just going to take me now to the hospital? Right? Thinking at this point I was 6 centimeters dilated. So I was like, I'm 6 centimeters dilated. Yeah, the ambulance is going to take me from this hospital to the next one. And the midwife is like, no, I'm sorry. In the Netherlands, that's not a reason to get an ambulance. You're going to have to drive yourselves. And I was like, what?
How far was the hospital from you?
It was maybe another 20 minutes from the hospital where we were.
Huh.
And yeah, so basically the hospital was very kind. They gave me one of those, I call them puppy pads. It's like plastic on the bottom.
Yep.
Yeah, so they gave me a puppy pad just in case something happened in the car. I was like, oh, thank you. That's very generous. And we then ended up going. My husband was so grateful that our doula was there because she drove in front of him. So she set up her navigation and she was following that and he could just blindly follow her. And I remember that day, the rain was just like, to say that it was pouring buckets, like, I don't know. I don't know if I've ever seen rain like that before. It was pouring down in sheets. and your windshield wipers, they don't work fast enough even on the fastest setting. Like you can't see anything in front of you, but it was rain like that. And we arrived to this next hospital, and there is a line of cars trying to get in. And I'm like, what the hell is this now? Why? What is happening? And it turned out that the ramp to let you into the parking was broken. So
Oh, of course.
no, no car could get in. Oh my gosh. And yeah, finally they fixed it. We sat in this line for a long time. My husband was like, what should I do? Should I just go and get a wheelchair and like just leave my car and wheel you to the hospital? Like we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how long it was going to take to get this thing fixed. But it was just 5 minutes. But when you're in labor, 5 minutes feels like a very long time.
Exactly.
So, but in the end, it was fine. We ended up getting in, and then he drove me just like right to the entrance. He ran to grab a wheelchair, and then yeah, I got in the wheelchair, and then we continued to the birthing suite that was like available for me. So that was really nice. That felt good to like be settled, finally like, okay, now I can give birth,
Do you remember your contractions slowing down at all during that stressful transfer process?
No,
It just kept going, huh?
They just kept going, and I was sure because the progression from 4 centimeters to 6 was like so quick that I really was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have a baby in the car. But yeah, but it didn't happen. I mean, once we arrived and they checked me, I was still 6, so that was okay. And then my doula suggested that I get in the shower. Unfortunately, the hospital that we went to, they did not have a birthing tub. And that was kind of a bummer, but she said, I know you really have your heart set on a water birth. Why don't you get in the shower? And I was like, great, that sounds good. It's funny because a lot of women, or like anytime that I read about like what to put in your hospital bag, or, when women talk about giving birth, they always talk about how cold they were and how much they wanted to have like extra socks and fuzzy blankets and all this stuff. I had the complete opposite. I was so hot. I told the midwife and the doula, I was like, I want an ice shower. And they were like, that might slow down your contractions. That might, how about a warm shower, And I was like, no, I want icy. And they were like, cool. And I was like, fine, cool. Like we were negotiating the temperature of my shower, but it was, yeah, I was just so hot like the whole time that I was giving birth. And yeah, so we spent some time in the shower. And one thing was that ever since my contractions started, I couldn't pee. Like I felt like I needed to pee, but every time I would try, I just couldn't. I couldn't. So I didn't know what was going on, why that felt like that. But yeah, I remember at that time trying to pee after I had a shower, and that wasn't working. So then I went and I mentioned it to the midwife, and she was like, let's have a look. And then she was like, yeah, well, would you like, we can put in like not a catheter, but like they have this like little instrument where they can put it in, you quickly pee, and then they take it out. So it's kind of like a catheter, but it doesn't stay in. And I felt so much relief when she did that. And then she said, how about we try to puncture your waters? It's like, great, let's do that as well. That's going to give some relief. And she did. She managed to do that as well. And from then on, every single contraction that I would have would release like a gush of fluid. So much that I thought like there's going to be no more fluid left for this baby. Like it was enormous amounts of fluid. They just kept having to change not the sheets, but yeah, those puppy pads.
Yeah.
They had to change them almost after every contraction. It was just endless. But yeah, so everything was progressing totally fine until about 8 centimeters. And at 8 centimeters is when I got stuck. So for 4 hours, I labored at 8 centimeters with no change. After 2 hours, they said, how about we give you some Pitocin and we try to speed it up? You're so close, like, let's try. And I was like, sure, that's fine. I don't mind. I was in a completely zen headspace. Everything was fine. I could do anything. I don't know. I was just like totally in my own world. I remember my husband being there. I remember the doula, the midwife. I remember that they gave me this TENS machine and that they were doing like counter pressure and everything. But once we finally had arrived to our hospital suite, I was in another planet. I was in my oxytocin hormones. I was feeling them and I was happy. Yes, they were painful contractions, but I just had this mantra of I can do it, I can do it. I'm not going to feel this one again. I'm going to meet my son. And that's just what I kept repeating with every contraction and got through it. So they gave me the the Pitocin to speed up labor, and it did speed up. And then they tied me to the machines and like started monitoring the baby and everything. That's when it became quite medical. Everything was going fine until at one point I would have contractions and the room, which we had been listening to his heartbeat, would just go silent. Every time I would have a contraction, my son's heart would stop beating. And that was terrifying. That was like the moment that I really felt fear. You could see it also in their faces that this was not okay anymore. So, and also they mentioned at some point that they realized that he had pooped in his waters, which is a really not a good sign when you're having a baby. It means that the baby is stressed and, you need to get them out now or they're going to inhale it. It's not a good thing. So at that point, they said, "How do you feel about an emergency C-section?" And I was like, "Yep, fine," because I did not want to hear another single contraction where his heart would stop beating, That was not something that I wanted to experience anymore, and I just wanted to meet him and have it over. So they said, "Okay, we're going to get the surgeon and we're going to get everything prepped." Now it's like 10 o'clock at night. So my contractions started around 3 a.m. and now we're at 10 o'clock. So I had been in labor for like a good amount of time. One thing that I didn't mention is that I have an incredible phobia of belly buttons.
Oh
And
my gosh, no kidding.
this is something that I've had my whole life, and I understand how ridiculous it is to be afraid of belly buttons. But I don't like to look at other people's, especially mine. Don't touch it. Don't be near it. Like, I don't like belly buttons and me, we just don't mix. And so, one thing that my husband and I had discussed is that if I had to have a C-section, I would need to be completely unconscious. I would not be able to do it with a spinal because even though you don't feel the pain, theoretically, right, when you're having a C-section, you do feel pressure and touch, and you can feel them doing things to you. And I knew that if they were doing that, with my phobia, I would probably have a panic attack and start screaming. And then I knew that I didn't want to take away their attention from the baby with my panic attack. So I knew that the right choice for me, for my son, for my husband, for us, was that I'm unconscious and then take out the baby and then wake me up. Like, because of
Yeah.
this intense phobia that I have. But this hospital we had never been to. They didn't know us. They didn't, they didn't know my background. They didn't know anything about it. So as they're wheeling me down, I'm just shouting, "I need a total anesthesia. Give me a total anesthesia." And everyone's looking at me like, "What is this woman doing?" But I was really firm that that's what needed to happen. And I mean, of course, I'm not going to sit there and explain the whole thing to them at that moment, but we got to the operating room and I met the anesthesiologist there and also the surgeon. And I just said to the surgeon, "I have an incredible phobia of belly buttons. I want a total anesthesia." And I guess he could see it in my face and my eyes. And he was like, "Okay, we're going to do that then. But I'm going to need to prep you without you being under. So all the things that are going to be painful, like putting in a catheter, sterilizing your vagina, doing all of these things, you're going to have to be awake for it." And I was like, "I don't care. Just do it and then knock me out." While they were prepping me, they took my husband out of the operating room. And by they, I mean the anesthesiologist, who told my husband that he should override my request for a total anesthesia, that my husband should instead decide to not give permission for that and that I would have a spinal.
What?
Because the anesthesiologist explained to Alex, if he allowed me to have a total anesthesia, that the chances that either the baby or I die are very high. That's what he told him. And Alex was like, "Oh my God, you're telling me now that I have to choose between my wife, my son, and like the wishes and like the things that we had discussed in advance." And my husband was like, "No, I stand with my wife. I know that she needs this and I stand with her." And the anesthesiologist like went off in a huff, like, "Pff, Like, you're basically killing your child. And that's how he left my husband in a dark hallway by himself. And yeah, just like closed the door to the operating room behind him.
My jaw is on the floor right now.
Yeah,
Is that even medically correct? I've never heard
no,
anything like that before ever.
no, it's not medically correct. In the end, after my son was born, we did report this anesthesiologist, and he had to give a formal apology to my husband for what he had done, because that was just like, you know, it was really totally unprofessional and incredible to say, like, yeah, it was a horrible position to put him in.
And traumatic to say the
Yeah.
least.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And but my husband, he said at this point now, so I went, I was asleep, I don't remember at this point, but now my husband, what he says is he was there for about 10 or 15 minutes, and he was just waiting in the hallway. Nobody came to say anything to him, and he just sat there, sat there, sat there. He goes, and then in one moment, I just heard this cry.
Oh,
He goes, and I collapsed on the floor and I was crying because I knew that our son was alive.
that's making me tear up.
Sorry.
It's okay.
But he didn't know about me. So he was still like in a panic, but at least he knew that our son was okay. Then when I woke up, I woke up and I looked around and I said, "Is my baby okay?" And the nurses were like, "Yeah, he's okay, but you're in the recovery room. You need to stay here for a few minutes before we can take you out, because of the anesthesia."
Right.
So, and I remember all I wanted was somebody to hold my hand. That urge was so strong, and I asked every single nurse that came in, I was like, "Can you just hold my hand for just a minute?" And they were like, "No." I was like, "Please just hold my hand." No, nobody would hold my hand. I I wear glasses, and of course I did not have those with me, so I couldn't see anything. I'm legally blind without my glasses, so I couldn't see what was going on. I just wanted like a little bit of comfort, but nobody would give that to me, and I remember that so strong. Like, I wanted my baby. I of course couldn't see him in that moment, and then none of the nurses were nice enough to hold my hand.
Where was your doula at this point? Was she with your husband?
Yeah, so she was with my husband. She wasn't allowed to come down to the operating room with us, so she had to stay in like the birthing suite where we were. And then my husband could go down to the operating room, but he couldn't come into the operating room. He had to stay outside.
Okay.
And so then once the baby was born, then my husband went back to the birthing room. And that's eventually whenever that, I don't know, maybe an hour passed by, that they could then take me out of that recovery room. They took me back to the birthing suite. And then we were all reunited, the three of us. And that's when they told me that our son was he was like they placed him in an incubator because he was born under anesthesia. So he was born asleep, basically. They said that oh my goodness, what is that scale? Now it escapes my mind.
Oh,
When they rate the babies?
the app, is it the APGAR?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the APGAR score is from 0 to 10. And
Yes.
he was born, they rated him a 0. So basically he was not breathing, he was not doing anything, but that was as a result of the anesthesia. But because of that, they wanted to put him for one day in an incubator and just monitor his oxygen levels and stuff like that. So I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not even going to get to see my baby today. But then and now we're talking like now it's the middle of the night. The hospital is quiet. There's nobody except us. And then the nurse comes in and she says, would you like to see your baby? And I was like, yes, please. And then they wheeled me in my whole entire bed and everything. They just wheeled me into this place with all these babies that were in incubators. And they said, "Do you want to try to nurse him?" And I was like, "Yes, of course I want to touch him. So they took him out of his little incubator and we just had this moment, that we were all just together and trying to nurse him and everything. So it was really a very lovely moment. And then they were like, "Okay, how about now you try to go to bed, go to sleep, get some rest, and then in the morning you can see your baby and everything will be okay." So that's kind of what happened.
Did they
With
ever
my son.
figure out why you weren't able to progress any further, or why he was having those heart decelerations and stuff?
So they think because he was so big, he couldn't come far down enough into the birth canal. So his head went as far as it could go. He was born at 4 kilos and 20 grams. He was a big baby, but they think that's why he just couldn't. I just could, yeah, it just didn't open enough.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was our birth story, and he was born with a full head of the blondest hair you've ever seen. And
Oh,
it was just so cute because, well, Dutch children, I think also like Swedish children are like very blonde, right? Like they're like
platinum blonde.
platinum blonde.
Yes.
But apparently, when they're born as babies, they're usually born with dark hair and then it turns blonde. So the fact that he came out so blonde was like a thing at the hotel or at the hospital. So all of these nurses were like, "Oh, we heard there's a blonde baby. Can we see him?" And all these people were visiting us and, like visiting him and seeing this gorgeous little blonde baby. And my husband is Spanish and he has dark hair and dark eyes, and I have naturally, darker hair and dark eyes. And we have this blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby. And it was just such an incredible thing to see him and to be with him. And yeah, it was a wonderful experience. Now, because I had a C-section, then you're required to stay in the hospital for 3 days, basically, so they can make sure you're okay and the baby's okay. But our doula was coming to visit us at the hospital, and while she was there, I was nursing or trying to, because I didn't have milk yet. Generally, they say that when you have a vaginal birth, then the hormones in your body register that you've had a baby, and then your milk comes in kind of right away. Whereas when you have a C-section, your body doesn't go through that period, and it's still a bit confused. So your milk doesn't necessarily come in right away, and you need to work on it to get it to come. So while we were nursing and practicing, she was like, "I don't think his latch is okay. He doesn't look like he's nursing the proper way." And then she said, "I think he might have a tongue tie," which is when that little bit of your tongue that connects it so you can't swallow your tongue, when there's like a little bit of too much of that. Um, and it's a really easy process. You just need to snip it. And at that moment, when babies are born, there's no nerves there, so they don't feel it. Basically, a doctor can do that while your baby is sleeping. They can snip that little bit of their tongue and just cut it a little bit, and then it can really dramatically improve your chances of nursing successfully, because it's not going to hurt you as much and they're not going to have to work as hard. It's a great thing
Win-win.
to do. So, yeah. So definitely, if any pregnant women are listening to this, like when you have your baby, just have them checked for a tongue tie if you plan on breastfeeding. And actually, my doula was right. He did have a tongue tie, and we ended up just getting that, clipped while we were still in the hospital. And my milk didn't come for about 7 days.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, for 7 days, we here in the Netherlands, you can also rent a professional strength breast pump. So that's what they suggested that I do. And also in the hospital, I was doing it. And like 10 times a day, I would put on this breast pump and run like a 20-minute cycle. Never getting any milk, being completely discouraged, being like, why is this happening? Also at the same time, nursing or trying to nurse my baby. So he would be there for a while, and then I would pump, and then he would get, formula, because he was obviously not getting anything from me. But on the seventh day, just like it was like the floodgates opened and there was milk, and I thought, oh wow, this is amazing. So for 7 days it was a struggle, but after that everything was okay.
I just like off the record, I just want to commend you for triple feeding because I had to do that with my daughter for like 4 months. My
Oh
milk,
my
I,
God.
I have I have chronic low milk supply, so like I didn't not have milk come in, but it was always low and I was so determined, right? And so
Yeah.
it was the nursing and then the pumping and then the topping off with formula, and it feels like that's all you freaking do
Oh yeah.
is feed your baby. And now with my current son, I exclusively pump because we had all kinds of latch issues. And maybe we can
Yeah.
put this on the record. In Sweden, like tongue ties and lip ties, you just can't get them diagnosed here. It's not something they will openly tell you, the pediatric nurses and stuff, that it's just not something they really look into. It's not something they try to revise actively. So a lot of the women
Mm.
here have to like super advocate for themselves to try
Yeah.
to get these ties revised. And for me, it was hell. And so I ended up exclusively pumping. So hearing you being attached to the pump 10 times a day and dealing with the baby, and oh my gosh, it's so exhausting. So my heart is with you. I just want to say.
No, I mean it was yeah, no, it's awful when you want to nurse. So I know that feeling of like I want to do it. I believe my body can do it. And then if your body is like letting you down, it's really frustrating, you know,
It
because
is.
and especially I'm sure in Sweden, just like in the Netherlands, there's like a whole big thing about breast is best, which I think, okay, whether it's true, I mean, it's true, right? But if you cannot give breast milk, that culture just like makes you feel like you're failing already as a mom. And you shouldn't, because fed is best, right?
Exactly.
Like
Yep.
that's the thing. So it's just that culture of like, oh, I have to breastfeed and really want, like I wanted to, and then thinking, oh my gosh, if I don't get milk, then I'm a failure. And that's not true. It is, if you are listening to this, it is not true. You feed your baby however you can, and that's what you need to do. But
Say it
yeah.
louder for the people in the back. I
Yeah.
completely agree.
Yeah. So in the end, like, yeah, it was okay. And then we established good breastfeeding. But what you say this, it's not the maternity nurses or the pediatricians that would diagnose the tongue tie. It had to be an ENT doctor that did it. So if you're in Sweden or anywhere else, like what you were saying about, having to advocate for yourself, we were shouting. We were really asking. We said, we're not leaving this hospital until we get his tongue tie cut. And that was thanks to our doula. So that was like a huge thing that she did for us, because we would have been in the same situation of, the doctors being like, well, that's not something we really do here, blah, blah. But yeah, finally it was an ENT doctor that came in. And it was so funny because it's literally like, I mean, I feel like I could have probably done the cutting if they had given me some sterile scissors, because it's one snip and you're done, right? But when that ENT doctor came in, she brought literally 20 residents that all came to watch the procedure. And I thought, what procedure is like, oh my God. Like, then I got scared because I'm like, wow, if all these students have to learn, like, what is happening? And she was like, snip, that's it, we're done. And I was like, oh, okay.
Wow. Is it just that rare of a procedure?
But it's not rare at all because,
How?
again, according to my doula, and she says that the reason that now there are so many babies born with tongue ties is that it's the folic acid that we are taking in our prenatals, which is supposed to prevent spina bifida, right? Which is like an open spine. That's, I think, spina bifida.
Yep.
That's what folic acid is supposed to prevent. Well, and it does that by maybe helping generate a few extra cells inside of your baby. So these cells get generated at the tongue. So many babies are born with tongue ties, undiagnosed tongue ties, and that's how she knew to look for it. And
Oh
it's
my
linked with
gosh.
folic acid, or yeah, folic acid. So
Yeah.
interesting little tidbit, but yeah.
I
So
never knew that.
right,
Huh.
and there you go, another for doulas and midwives and everyone. They're just so clever, and they know so many of these little things that my doctors never mentioned. That like
Right.
all those times that we were insistent on seeing the gynecologist, like they never. All of the most helpful, most positive things that I'm saying now about my birth were as a result of our midwife and doula. Like,
Right.
so yeah, that was our son.
So that's the end of part one of Jovie's story. Stay tuned for part two, which I hope to have uploaded within the next day or two. But in the meantime, if you are an expat abroad who has had your kids abroad, or you have sought fertility treatments abroad, or you have gone through postpartum overseas or in a foreign country and you're interested in telling your story, please email me at thebirthabroadpodcast@gmail.com, and I'd love to talk to you more about it. Thanks so much for listening, you guys. Bye bye.